The phone lit up at 2:14 in the morning. Evelyn wasn't asleep. She hadn't been able to sleep for 3 nights running. Something restless and nameless had been keeping her eyes open, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom she'd shared with Damien Calloway for 20 years. She told herself it was stress. She told herself it was the renovation noise from the floor above. She told herself a lot of things. Then Damien's phone buzzed against the nightstand, and the screen turned the whole room blue. I was lying on his side, facing away from her, his breathing slow and even. She could have ignored it. She almost did. But the preview was right there, bright and clear and impossible to unsee. My silky tiger, I miss you already. Thank you for the 2 unforgettable nights. Evelyn read it 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it the first time, but because some part of her brain kept insisting there was another explanation. A wrong number, a joke, anything. There wasn't. If you've ever had a moment where your entire life cracked down the middle without making a single sound, then you already know what happened to Evelyn Carter at 2:14 on a Tuesday morning. And if you haven't, I want you to ask yourself something right now. What would you do? Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at something in your chest, please hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't, because what happens next is the kind of thing you will not want to miss in pieces. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Evelyn did next, you have to understand what she was walking away from. Evelyn Carter grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, the daughter of a high school principal and a woman who made the best peach preserves in the county and never once raised her voice in anger. She was not a woman built for the world she eventually married into. She knew how to set a table for 12, how to read people across a crowded room, how to hold a conversation with senators and city councilmen without saying anything that mattered. But she learned all of that after. Before Damien, she was just a girl who studied literature at NYU, wore her hair in a braid she never quite got right, and actually believed, that love was something you chose every day. She met Damien Calloway at 23, at a gallery opening she'd been dragged to by her roommate. He was 31, already building the kind of quiet reputation that made people step back when he entered a room. He wasn't loud about what he was. That was the thing that got her. He wasn't performing power the way she'd seen other men do it. He just had it, and he wore it like it was nothing. "You're the only person in this room who's actually looking at the paintings," he'd said. She'd looked at him sideways. "Everyone else is looking at each other." He smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that didn't happen often enough to be rehearsed. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I mean." She married him 14 months later. She found out what he actually was 6 months after that. Not all at once. It came in pieces. A conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, men at the door at 3 in the morning, a name dropped in a whisper that made the whole room go still. And when she finally sat across from him at the kitchen table and asked him directly, he didn't lie to her. "I should have told you before," he said. "I'm going to be honest with you now, and I'm going to let you decide what you want to do." She stayed. People ask her why, and there's no answer that sounds right when you say it out loud. She loved him. She believed he loved her. And she believed, despite everything, despite the things she knew and the things she chose not to look at too closely, that inside whatever he was, there was a man who would not hurt her. For almost 20 years, she wasn't wrong. Their life was not a fairy tale. She wants that to be understood. The penthouse on the Upper West Side was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, cold and correct, and a little bit lonely. The black SUVs that followed her everywhere weren't protection so much as they were a reminder that she belonged to something larger than herself. She raised 2 children, Marcus and Lily, in a home where certain doors were always closed and certain questions were never asked. But there was also this. Damien came home every night that he possibly could. He sat at the dinner table. He helped Marcus with his college applications in a way that was more patient than Evelyn expected from a man who ran his empire with the kind of precision that left no room for error. He danced with Lily in the kitchen on Sunday mornings to songs he pretended he didn't know the words to, and then he always knew the words. He told Evelyn she was the only woman who had ever made him feel like a person rather than a position. She believed him. She had believed him right up until 2:14 on a Tuesday morning, when a message from a contact saved as a single red heart told her everything she should have known sooner. She didn't wake him. That surprised her later, how calm she was in those first minutes. She set his phone back on the nightstand face down. She got up. She walked to the bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists until the shaking stopped. Then she sat on the edge of the soaking tub her husband had installed because she'd mentioned once, offhandedly, that she'd always wanted one, and she thought about the business trip. 4 days in Chicago. A meeting with people she wasn't told the names of, because she never was, because that was the deal she had accepted. He'd kissed her at the door with the kind of deliberate tenderness that now made her stomach turn. He'd texted her from O'Hare. He'd called her from what she'd assumed was his hotel room while she put Lily to bed. 2 unforgettable nights. Which 2 nights? The first 2? The last 2? Had he been on the phone with Evelyn while this woman, whoever she was, whatever she was to him, had been lying in the same bed? She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed through it. When she came back to bed, she lay down beside her husband and stared at the ceiling until the room went gray with early light. He woke at 6:30 the way he always did, showered and dressed and came to kiss her temple before he left. "You sleep okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. He left. She gave herself until noon to fall apart. She sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the island. Not the floor of their shining, curated life, but the actual floor, cold tile against her palms. And she let herself grieve the things she hadn't lost yet, but already knew was gone. Then she washed her face, called her office to reschedule her afternoon, and drove to the one person she had always gone to when everything went wrong. Charlotte. Charlotte Whitmore and Evelyn had been friends since college. 23 years of friendship, the kind that fills the gaps left by family. Charlotte was brilliant and blunt and occasionally exhausting, and she was the person Evelyn had called after every hard thing. Her miscarriage at 29, her mother's diagnosis. The night Damien's world had come too close to hers in a way that left her unable to sleep for a week. Charlotte had always known how to make the unbearable bearable. She had a gift for it. Evelyn parked in the garage beneath Charlotte's building on West 68th, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, and something made her try the handle. The door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual for Charlotte, who was consistently and infuriatingly cavalier about security for a woman whose best friend was married to Damien Calloway. She stepped inside. The apartment was quiet, not empty quiet, just quiet. The kind of quiet that has a presence to it. "Charlotte?" Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. She walked through the living room, past the kitchen, where a half-full pot of coffee was still warm on the burner, down the short hallway toward the bedroom. The door was open. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She didn't do anything that would later make her embarrassed in the retelling, which is perhaps the strangest thing about a moment of complete devastation. How much of your dignity you manage to hold on to, even when the floor is collapsing under you. She looked. She registered what she was seeing. She took a single step back. Damien saw her first. He said her name, Evelyn, in a voice she had never heard from him before, a voice that had nothing in it, no authority, no control, none of the composure that had always been as natural to him as breathing. Charlotte turned. Her face went the color of old paper. Evelyn looked at her husband and her best friend in Charlotte's bed and thought, with a clarity so sharp it almost felt like calm, "I have to get out of this apartment before I become someone I don't recognize." She turned around and walked back down the hallway. She picked up her keys from where she'd set them on the entryway table. She opened the front door. "Evelyn?" Damien was behind her now. She could hear him, but she did not turn around. "Don't," she said. Not loudly, not with any particular heat, just the word, dropped like a stone. She left. She drove. She didn't know where at first. She just drove, south through Midtown, then west, then north again, on Riverside Drive with the Hudson going gray and flat to her left. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her brain was processing and not processing in equal measure, the way it does when the thing that's happened is too large to fit into a single moment. She called her sister in Raleigh, got voicemail. She called Marcus at school, but hung up before it rang through. He was 20. She wasn't going to do that to him. She drove past Grants Park and thought about stopping, then didn't. By the time she got home, she had made 2 decisions. The first, she would not beg. She would not rage. She would not give either of them the satisfaction of her falling apart in front of them, because that was not what falling apart in front of people looked like. It just handed the moment to someone who didn't deserve to hold it. The second, she was leaving. Not today. Not in a way that would look like running, but she was leaving New York, leaving this apartment, leaving the life she'd built in the shadow of her husband's empire. And she was taking her children and whatever was left of herself, and she was not coming back. She went upstairs to their bedroom and pulled a suitcase down from the closet shelf. She set it on the bed. She opened it. And then she heard voices from the floor below. The study was directly beneath their bedroom. Damien's space, a room she'd been welcomed in but never fully invited to, lined with bookshelves that mostly held things that weren't books, and a desk that was always clear in a way that suggested papers moved through it rather than stayed. The voices came up through the heating vent, the old kind that carried sound between floors the way they didn't bother to prevent anymore. She recognized Damien's voice immediately. The other voice took her a moment, then she placed it. Sal. Sal Ferraro, who had worked for Damien for almost 15 years, and whose primary function, as far as Evelyn had been able to gather, involved making things that needed to stop. She should have kept packing. She didn't move. Told you it was going to go sideways, Sal's voice, gravel in irritation. I told you that 2 years ago. I'm not asking for your opinion on it. Damien's voice, flat and controlled, but there was something underneath it she hadn't heard before. Damage, maybe. Or something closer to terror. I'm telling you what happens now. What happens now is your wife walks. And when she walks, the Medina people are going to test you. They're going to look for, I know what they're going to look for. A silence. You want to tell me how long? Sal again. It wasn't. Damien stopped, started again. It wasn't what it looks like. It looked like what it looked like. Another silence, longer this time. Charlotte and I were. His voice dropped and Evelyn pressed herself against the wall beside the vent without quite deciding to do it. It's not something I can explain in a way that makes it make sense. We were kids. Before Evelyn, before any of this. Her grandmother. He stopped again. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, Sal agreed flatly. What matters is your wife is upstairs right now deciding whether to burn your life down. She won't. She will. You know she will. She's the only person you've never been able to read, and that should tell you something. A pause, and then Sal's voice dropped a register. You know what you have to do. Evelyn stopped breathing. She's not a threat, Damien said, low and very careful. That's not what I meant. Sal's voice was patient in a way that made it somehow worse. I meant you need to fix this. You need to call Harmon, get a sit-down with your wife and whatever attorney she uses, and make sure this doesn't turn into something public. Right. Damien's exhale was barely audible through the vent. Right. And Damien. Sal again, and something in his tone shifted, got quieter, less operational, and strangely, unexpectedly, more human. For what it's worth, in 15 years, I've never seen a man more afraid of losing his wife than you are right now. No response from Damien, or if there was one, Evelyn couldn't hear it. She stood beside the vent for a long moment after the voices stopped. Then she went back to the suitcase. She folded a shirt. She set it inside. She folded another. Her hands were not completely steady this time. But she kept packing, because here was the thing Sal didn't know, the thing Damien didn't know, the thing that had settled into her chest somewhere between the bathroom floor and the moment she walked into Charlotte's bedroom and back out again. It didn't matter how afraid he was of losing her. He had already made the choice, and she was going to make hers. Marcus didn't answer when she called the second time, but Lily did. Lily, who was 16 and perceptive in the way that teenagers sometimes are when the adults around them have been performing stability for too long. Mom. Just her name, first thing. What's wrong? I need to talk to you when you get home from school today, okay? Not on the phone. Mom, I'm fine. I promise I'm fine. She wasn't, not entirely, but she was something that was adjacent to fine. She was functional, which was going to have to do. Just come home. Okay, Lily said, and then quieter. Did something happen with Dad? Evelyn closed her eyes, opened them. Come home. She hung up and started making a list. Not an emotional list. A practical one. The kind she was good at. What needed to be moved. What could be shipped. What required a call to an attorney. She wrote it by hand on the monogram notepad Damien had given her as a joke. Their third Christmas together, and she wrote it in the small, clear printing she'd used since college. And she did not cry while she was writing it. She cried later, in the shower, where the sound was absorbed and private and hers alone. And then she got out, dried her hair, and waited for her daughter to come home. Some things end in fire. Some things end in ice. What was happening in the Callaway penthouse on that gray Tuesday afternoon was neither. It was something quieter, and in some ways more final. It was a woman deciding who she was going to be on the other side of this. And nobody, not her husband with all his fear, not her best friend with all her guilt, not the men with their black SUVs and their careful silence, was going to be able to stop her. Lily came through the front door at 3:47, still in her school coat, her backpack hanging off one shoulder the way it always did despite every conversation Evelyn had ever had with her about her posture. She dropped it by the entryway the way she always did, despite every conversation about that too. And then she stopped, because she could read a room the way her father could read a room, and the room was telling her something. Evelyn was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The notepad was face down. The suitcase was still upstairs, closed, pushed to the side of the bed, where Damien wouldn't see it immediately when he came home, if he came home. Lily looked at her mother and didn't say anything for a moment. She was 16, but sometimes she looked older than that, around the eyes. "Should I sit down?" she asked. "Yeah," Evelyn said. "Sit down." She sat. She put her elbows on the table, which Evelyn had corrected 1,000 times, and this time Evelyn said nothing about it. Lily noticed that too. Her jaw tightened slightly. "Is Dad okay?" "Your dad is fine." The words came out more clipped than she intended. "Your dad is physically fine." Lily's eyes moved across her mother's face like she was reading something in a language she mostly knew. But I need you to know that we're going to be making some changes. Not today, not this week, but soon. And I want you to hear it from me first, before you hear it anywhere else." "Changes." Lily's voice was carefully flat. "What kind of changes?" Evelyn looked at her daughter, this girl she had raised inside a life that had always asked too much of everyone in it, and she made a decision. Not the whole truth. Not yet. But enough. "Your dad and I are going to separate." The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the building above them, someone dragged a piece of furniture across a floor. "Okay," Lily said. "Just that." "Okay. You can ask me—" "I know." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "I've kind of known something was wrong for a while." She paused. "Did he do something?" "Lily, I'm not a kid, Mom." "I know you're not." Evelyn reached across the table and put her hand over her daughter's. Lily didn't pull away, which meant she was scared. She always pulled away when she wasn't. "I'm not going to tell you everything right now because some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it's just something your dad and I have to work through. But I need you to know that whatever happens, you are not going to be caught in the middle of it. I won't let that happen." Lily looked down at their hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright but dry. She'd gotten that from Damien, that particular discipline. "Where are we going to go?" "Grandma and Grandpa's, for now. To Asheville." A pause. "And then?" "And then we figure out the next part." Lily nodded slowly. She pulled her hand back, not angrily, just reclaiming herself. "Does Marcus know?" "I'm calling him tonight." Another nod. She stood up, picked up her backpack from the entryway, came back through and stopped at the kitchen door. "Mom?" "Yeah." "I'm not going to fall apart about this." Evelyn looked at her. "You're allowed to, if you need to." Lily shook her head just slightly. "I know. I'm just telling you. I won't." She paused. "I'm going to do homework." She went upstairs. Evelyn sat at the table with her cold tea and listened to the ceiling creak under her daughter's footsteps until they stopped, and the apartment went quiet again. She turned the notepad back over and added 2 items to the list. Damien came home at 7. She heard the elevator before she heard him, the specific mechanical sound of it, stopping at their floor, the particular weight of his step in the entry hall that she'd lived with for so long, it had become something her body registered before her brain did. She was in the kitchen. She stayed there. He appeared in the doorway. He was still in his work clothes, his jacket on, which meant he'd come directly home rather than stopping at the office the way he sometimes did to decompress. His face was controlled, but only just. Around the edges of it, she could see what it was costing him. She didn't look up from the pot she was stirring. It was soup. She'd made soup because it was something to do with her hands, and because the children needed to eat, and because the idea of ordering food tonight felt unbearable in a way she couldn't fully explain. "Lily home?" he said. "Upstairs." "Evelyn." He said her name the way he had in Charlotte's hallway, stripped of everything. "I'm not doing this in front of Lily." She kept her voice even. "We eat dinner, we act like people, and then we talk." He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him deciding something, or maybe accepting something, which was different. Then he said, "Okay," and hung his jacket on the chair by the door the way she'd asked him not to do 100 times, and she didn't say anything about it. Dinner was the most exhausting meal of Evelyn's life. And that included the Calloway family Christmas where Damien's uncle had pulled a knife on a business associate over the bread rolls. Lily came down, spoke in complete sentences, asked Damien something about a history project she was working on, and ate most of her soup. Damien answered her question. He asked about her friend Priya's recital. Lily told him it had been last week. He'd missed it. He said he knew, and he was sorry. Lily shrugged and said it was fine. It was not fine. But they all agreed, in the wordless way of families that have learned to manage exposure, to let it be fine for the duration of the meal. When Lily went back upstairs, Evelyn cleared the table and Damien stayed in his chair, which meant he understood that whatever was coming required stillness. She ran water over the bowls, turned off the tap, turned around. "How long?" she said. He didn't pretend not to understand the question. It was one time, 2 nights. "I heard you tell Sal it wasn't what it looked like." His jaw moved. "You heard that. The vent in the bedroom carries." She crossed her arms, not defensively. She just didn't know what else to do with them. "So whatever you were planning to tell me, I'd appreciate if it was actually true." He exhaled through his nose. 2 nights, in Chicago. I hadn't... He stopped, looked at the table, looked back at her. "We hadn't spoken in months, and then she was at the gala in April, and there was a conversation, and it went somewhere it shouldn't have, and in Chicago..." He stopped again. "Was Chicago the first time?" "Yes." She looked at him. She was very good at reading people. She'd had to be, married to him, and everything she knew about him told her he was telling the truth, which in some ways made it worse, because it meant she couldn't even have the comfort of a longer, more organized deception. It was one stupid, catastrophic decision, the kind that ruined things anyway. "Charlotte," she said. Just the name. Something moved through his face that she hadn't expected. Something old and complicated that had nothing to do with Evelyn, and that was almost worse than if it had. "She told you something," Evelyn said, not a question. "No." He shook his head. "She didn't tell you anything?" "I found her in your bed, Damien. We didn't exactly stop to chat." He pressed his hands flat on the table. "Before you and I met, before any of this, Charlotte and I were... I know you knew each other in high school. She told me that." "She didn't tell you everything." His voice was careful now, in the way it got when he was moving through something that mattered. "We were together for almost 2 years, and then my family moved, and we..." He exhaled. "We wrote letters for almost a year, and then they stopped. I assumed she'd moved on. I moved on." Evelyn was very still. "Okay." "I didn't know why the letters stopped until recently. Until Charlotte told me." "What do you mean you didn't know why?" "Her grandmother intercepted them." He said it quietly. "Both directions. Charlotte's letters to me, mine to hers. For almost a year. Her grandmother didn't think I was... She didn't want Charlotte with someone like me. Someone from that kind of family." Evelyn stared at him. "Charlotte didn't know," he said. "She thought I'd just disappeared. And I thought the same. We both thought the other one had just stopped." The kitchen was silent except for the building's ambient hum. "So she befriended me," Evelyn said slowly. Damien's eyes were watching her carefully. "I don't know all of... She became my best friend." Evelyn's voice was strange to her own ears, distant and precise. "She has been my best friend for 23 years, and you're telling me..." She stopped, started again. "Did you know? When you met me? Did you know she was..." "No, I didn't know you two knew each other until after we were already together. And by that point it seemed fine. By that point it seemed like it was in the past." He held her gaze. "I swear to you, Evelyn, I was not thinking about Charlotte when I married you." She believed that too, which meant she now had to hold 2 true things simultaneously, that her husband had loved her and that he had still done this, that her best friend had genuinely cared for her and had still done this, that the whole architecture of her adult life had been built on a foundation that had a crack in it she'd never been allowed to see. "I need you to go," she said. He didn't move. "Evelyn, I need you to go stay somewhere else tonight. Bring Sal, or bring nobody, I don't care. But I need you out of this apartment because I cannot..." Her voice fractured for exactly 1 second. She put it back together. "I cannot be in the same space as you right now and also be a reasonable person, and I need to be a reasonable person for Lily." He stood. He got his jacket from the chair. He paused at the kitchen door. "I'm not going to contest anything," he said. "Whatever you want, whatever you and the kids need, I'll make sure of it. She looked at him for a long moment. This man she had loved, this man who had failed her, this man who was somehow both things fully and at the same time, and she said, I know. He left. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a while. Not crying exactly, just somewhere beneath language, in the place where things are processed before they can be spoken. Then she got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on her daughter.
Asi.
She called Marcus the next morning, early, before Lily was up. She sat on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub because that had apparently become her position for hard conversations, and she told her son as much as she needed to tell him. He was quiet for a long time. Marcus had always processed silently, gone inside himself, and then come back with whatever he'd sorted out. Are you okay? He asked, which was not the first question she'd expected from him. I'm functioning, she said. That's about where I am. Do you need me to come home? Not yet. You have your exams. Mom, Marcus, I'm not asking you to come home yet. I'll tell you when I need you, and I'll mean it when I say it. Right now, I need you to stay where you are and let me handle this. Another silence. Did he? He stopped. Yes, she said, simpler than trying to frame it. The sound on the other end of the phone changed. She heard it shift, felt the weight of whatever her son was swallowing down. He was 20, and he loved his father in the complicated way you love someone who is larger than life, and also just a man who sometimes gets things badly wrong. Okay, he said finally. Okay, call me every day. I'll call you every day. And if you need me, you say so. You don't manage me. She almost smiled. He'd gotten that directness from her. Deal. She hung up and sat on the bathroom floor for another minute before she stood, splashed water on her face, and began packing the rest of her suitcase. She called her attorney, Barbara Hines, at 9 that morning. Barbara had been her attorney for 11 years. She'd helped Evelyn establish her own financial accounts early in the marriage at the advice of a woman she'd met at a fundraiser who had turned out to be wiser than she looked. Barbara was 71, wore her white hair in a severe braid, and had the affect of someone who had heard every possible version of human disaster and had learned to find them merely interesting. Tell me what you want, Barbara said after Evelyn had laid it out. I want out. I want it clean. I want the kids' futures protected. Okay. His representation? I don't know yet, but he told me... She paused. He said he wouldn't contest anything. Barbara made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. They all say that. I know, but I think he means it. Because... Evelyn thought about Sal's voice through the heating vent, about the way Damien had stood in the kitchen with his jacket in his hand, already surrendering. Because losing publicly would be worse for him than losing quietly, and because... She stopped. Evelyn. Because I think he actually knows what he did. Barbara was quiet for a moment, then, come in Thursday. Bring the list you've already made. I know you've made one. How do you know it? Because I've known you for 11 years, and you make lists. A pause. You're going to be okay. I know, Evelyn said, and she mostly believed it. Charlotte called on Wednesday. Evelyn stared at the name on her screen for 4 full rings. Then she answered because not answering was also a choice, and she wasn't ready to make it. Evelyn. Charlotte's voice was wrecked. Not performed. She'd known Charlotte long enough to know what performed sounded like. This was actual wreckage. I know you don't want to hear from me. I haven't decided what I want yet, Evelyn said, which was true. I know that nothing I say is... Charlotte stopped, started again. I'm not going to try to explain it into something acceptable. It isn't acceptable. I needed you to know that I know that. Okay? The friendship wasn't... Charlotte's voice broke slightly. You were real. You are real. That was never... I need you to know that. Evelyn stood at the window that looked out over the park, the one she'd stood at thousands of times over 20 years, watching the city below. Did you know who I was when we met? Silence. A long one. Yes, Charlotte said quietly. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. I'd run into Damien at an event the year before, Charlotte said. He was already with you. I wanted to know who you were. I told myself it was just... I don't know what I told myself. But it became real, Evelyn said. Not forgiving it, just naming it. It became real, Charlotte said. You are the best friend I've ever had, and Her voice went raw. I destroyed it. I know I destroyed it. Evelyn pressed her fingertips against the window glass. Cold. She thought about 23 years of phone calls, 23 years of showing up. Charlotte at the hospital when Marcus was born. Charlotte on the bathroom floor with her when she lost the second pregnancy. Charlotte across from her at 1,000 dinners with a glass of wine in her hand, making the world feel slightly more manageable. All of it real. All of it compromised. Both things. Fully. I can't talk to you right now, she said finally. I can't. I don't know what we are going to be, but I can't have this conversation yet. I know, Charlotte said. I know. I had to say it. I heard you. She paused. Don't call me again for a while, okay? Just let me have some time. Okay. Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Evelyn hung up. She stood at the window for another long moment. Then she turned, walked to the closet in the hallway, and took down the rest of what she needed. The divorce papers came back to Damien's attorney on a Friday morning, 2.5 weeks after Evelyn had walked into Charlotte's apartment. Barbara had been thorough. Evelyn had asked for the Manhattan townhouse they'd purchased 6 years earlier as a family investment, a portion of the liquid assets that predated the criminal enterprise and therefore existed in territory that was legally navigable, and the full educational trust for both children. She had not asked for the penthouse, the properties, the cars, or anything else. She had asked for enough to start over, and she had drawn the line precisely at enough. Damien's attorney called Barbara at 11:17 on that Friday morning, and according to Barbara's brief and satisfied report to Evelyn, said that Mr. Calloway had reviewed the terms and signed without revision. Evelyn was in the middle of wrapping dishes in the kitchen when Barbara called. She sat down on a box and listened, said thank you, hung up. She thought she would feel something, relief, maybe, or grief, or the particular hollow victory of a battle conceded rather than won. But what she felt, sitting on a cardboard box surrounded by the careful remnants of 20 years, was something she hadn't felt in longer than she could pinpoint. She felt like the next decision was hers to make. That was all. Just that. She was in Lily's room that Sunday, helping her daughter sort through what was coming and what was going into storage. When Damien's right hand, a quiet man named Torres, knocked on the apartment door, Evelyn opened it. Torres was holding an envelope. From Mr. Calloway, he said. He didn't embellish. She took it, closed the door, set it on the entryway table and went back to Lily's room and finished sorting through her daughter's closet because she was not going to read it in a doorway. She read it that night after Lily was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp on. It was handwritten, which surprised her. Damien typed everything. She'd watched him struggle with a birthday card for her sister once and end up asking her to write it, which she'd found funny at the time. This was in his handwriting. It was not long. Evelyn, I have been trying for 2 weeks to find a version of this letter that doesn't sound like a man trying to talk his way out of something. I don't think that version exists. I failed you before the affair. I failed you by building something that required you to disappear into it instead of exist inside it. I don't expect you to agree with me about why what happened with Charlotte happened. I'm not asking you to. I know what I'm losing. I want you to know that I know. D. She read it twice, folded it, put it back in the envelope, put the envelope in the kitchen drawer where she kept things she wasn't ready to throw away. She sat there for a while with the lamp on and the city doing its quiet nighttime things outside the window. Then she got up, turned off the lamp, and went to check on her daughter one more time before bed. They left New York on a Thursday morning in late October, when the air had turned and the park below had gone amber and rust, and the city was doing the thing it did in fall where it was heartbreakingly beautiful, and you half wanted to stay forever and knew exactly why you couldn't. Lily loaded her own boxes into the car without being asked. She was precise about it, arranged them with an efficiency she'd inherited from her father, and did not cry when they pulled away from the building. She put her headphones on and looked out the window. Evelyn drove. She drove south on the West Side Highway with the Hudson going silver to her right, and she didn't look in the rearview mirror because she had made a rule about that for today specifically. Marcus had offered to fly in and drive with them. She'd told him to meet her in Asheville when he could, on his own terms. She didn't need an escort. She'd driven this road 1,000 times. She drove through New Jersey, and then into Pennsylvania, and then further south, and the city fell away and the hills came up, and the sky opened into something wider and grayer and quieter, and somewhere around the Maryland border she let herself cry for about 10 miles. Not sobbing, not the dramatic kind, Just the kind that happens when your body decides it's finally safe to release something you've been holding. Lily watched the window with her headphones on and did not comment. But at some point, her hand came across the center console and rested on Evelyn's arm for a minute. Then she took it back and kept looking out the window. Evelyn wiped her face with the back of her hand and kept driving. She stopped for gas around 9 that night at an isolated station off a rural stretch of highway in Virginia. One of those places that existed as if someone had put it there specifically for the moments when you needed to stop but didn't want to commit to actually stopping anywhere. The station was lit bright yellow against the dark, and there were exactly 2 other cars. She filled the tank. She went inside to get coffee because she still had 2 hours, and the kind of tired she was went deeper than sleep was going to fix anyway. The man behind the counter had gray at his temples and the easy stillness of someone who'd made peace with a slower pace of living. He set a cup in front of her without her having to ask, which was strange, and then she realized she'd picked up a cup from the counter display and was holding it without having noticed. "Long drive?" he said. Not intrusively, just the natural conversation of a late-night gas station. "Yeah," she said, "long drive." He nodded like that was a complete answer. He poured the coffee. He didn't ask where she was headed or where she'd come from, which was maybe the kindest thing anyone had done for her in weeks. She paid. She stood at the counter for a moment longer than she needed to. "You need anything else?" he said. She looked at him. He had a steady face, the kind built up over years of things that had required steadiness. There was a name tag on his shirt that read Grant. "No," she said. "Thank you." She took her coffee and went back to the car. Lily had fallen asleep against the window. Evelyn sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, holding the warm cup in both hands, looking out at the dark road ahead. She thought about the letter in the kitchen drawer. She thought about Charlotte's voice on the phone. She thought about Sal saying in 15 years, "I've never seen a man more afraid of losing his wife." She thought about all of it, and then she set it aside, not forever, because grief doesn't let you do that, but for right now. For the next 2 hours. For the dark road and the coffee going warm in her hands, and her daughter sleeping against the glass, and the mountains somewhere ahead in the dark, waiting. She started the car. The mountains were dark when they arrived. Evelyn's parents lived 12 minutes outside Asheville proper, up a 2-lane road that wound through second-growth forest before opening onto a modest property her father had bought in 1987 and maintained with the particular stubbornness of a man who believed a house was something you earned through sustained attention. The porch light was on. It was past 11. Her mother, Ruth, came out before Evelyn had the engine off. She was 72 and moved like a woman who had decided aging was something that happened to other people. And she had Lily's door open and her arms around her granddaughter before Lily had fully woken up. Her father, Earl, stood on the porch with his hands in the pockets of his robe, and when Evelyn came up the steps, he looked at her face in the porch light and said nothing, just pulled her in with one arm, and she pressed her face briefly against his shoulder the way she hadn't done since she was much younger. "Come inside," he said. "Your mother made up the rooms." She came inside. She drank the tea her mother put in front of her without tasting it. She answered the gentle, careful questions. Yes, the drive was fine. Yes, she'd eaten. Yes, Lily was okay. And she let herself be taken care of for one night, because she knew that starting tomorrow she was going to have to be fully operational again, and she needed the 12 hours. She slept in her childhood bedroom with its faded quilt and the window that looked out over the backyard where her father's vegetable garden had gone brown and dormant for the season. She slept hard and without dreaming, which was a mercy. The first week in Asheville was the week of logistics. Barbara called daily with updates. Damien's attorneys had filed the initial paperwork confirming his agreement to the terms. The process would take several months to finalize, as it always did, but there were no obstacles being placed. The Manhattan townhouse was being transferred. The educational trust had been confirmed and funded, fully, before Evelyn had even asked Barbara to push on it. She hadn't asked for that. It was more than she'd requested. She noted it and set it aside and told herself it changed nothing, which was true, and also that it changed something about how she understood him, which was also true and harder to sit with. Lily enrolled in the Asheville High School the second week. She announced this as a fact rather than asking anyone's opinion, which her grandfather found amusing and her grandmother found exhausting. She came home from her first day, ate dinner, said the school was smaller than what she was used to and the kids seemed okay, and did her homework. That was the whole report. Evelyn spent those early weeks unpacking what they'd brought and making decisions about what they still needed. She drove into town. She learned the roads again. She'd grown up here, but 20 years in New York had made her slightly tentative on roads without congestion to navigate against. She had coffee with her mother's neighbors. She was polite and warm and answered their careful questions about being back with the practiced social fluency she'd developed as Damien Calloway's wife, and she did not tell them anything real. She was, by most visible measures, managing. What she was not managing was the thing that happened at 2 in the morning when the house was quiet and her parents were asleep and Lily's light was off down the hall, the thing where she lay on her back in the dark and went back through it all, like she was looking for the moment she should have seen it, the specific turn she should have taken differently. She never found it. The mind is not a reasonable instrument at 2 in the morning. It just keeps reviewing the footage, looking for the frame where things could have gone another way. She stopped sleeping through the night somewhere in the 3rd week. Not badly. She'd get 4 or 5 hours, wake, lie there, get up around 4 and make coffee, and sit at her parents' kitchen table while the house was dark, reading or making notes or doing nothing in particular. It became a kind of private hour. She started to like it even. It was on one of those early mornings, about 3 weeks in, that she found the box. She'd been going through her mother's storage closet, not for any particular reason. Ruth had asked her to find a winter coat that had been put away somewhere, and the request had sent Evelyn into the back of the hall closet, which turned into organizing the hall closet, which turned into moving things around on the upper shelf. A shoebox came loose from behind a stack of old photo albums and fell, and when she picked it up and found it heavier than expected, she opened it. Inside were photographs. Old ones. The kind with the date printed in orange numbers in the lower corner, the soft colors of film that had been sitting in chemical solutions in a drugstore back room for a month before anyone picked it up. And beneath the photographs, bundled with a rubber band gone brittle with age, were letters. She almost closed the box. She almost put the rubber band back and set the box on the shelf and went back to looking for her mother's coat. She didn't. She carried the box to the kitchen table and sat down with it in the gray early morning light, and she went through it slowly. The photographs came first. Some of them she recognized, her parents' younger faces, a birthday party she couldn't place. Her own baby pictures that she hadn't known copies of existed in her parents' house. And then, between 2 pictures of a Christmas she might have been 4 or 5 for, a photograph that stopped her. It was Charlotte. Charlotte, young, 19 or 20 maybe, in that particular way that photos from that era compressed ages slightly. She was laughing at something outside the frame, and beside her, with his arm around her shoulders and his face turned toward her rather than the camera, was a boy Evelyn needed a moment to place. It took her longer than it should have. I was younger, thinner, with the particular rawness of a boy who hadn't yet grown into his own face. But the eyes were the same. The line of his jaw was the same. Damien. She set the photograph on the table. She picked up the letters. They were tied in a bundle, all addressed to Charlotte, at an address Evelyn didn't recognize. A grandmother's address, she would later understand, the grandmother who had served as the postal intermediary for a girl whose parents had moved that year. The handwriting on the envelopes was young and slightly impatient, the penmanship of someone who wrote fast because the thoughts were coming too quickly. She pulled one out. She read it. And then she sat back in her chair and understood something she had not been given the information to understand before. The letter was 17 years old. It was from Damien. His name was signed at the bottom, first name only, in that same fast handwriting. And it was a letter from a boy to a girl he had believed had stopped writing to him, trying one last time to understand why. Not angry, not bitter in the way young men could sometimes be, just genuinely bewildered, and beneath the bewilderment, plainly devastated. I don't know if you're getting these. I don't know if something happened or if you just... I don't know. If you stopped, I need you to tell me that. I can take it. I just can't keep waiting for something that isn't coming. She read 6 of the letters. She didn't need to read more. What she was holding was the correspondence of 2 people who had believed they had been abandoned by each other, who had spent the years afterward carrying that wound without knowing it had been deliberately inflicted. And what she was sitting with was the knowledge that the man she had married and the woman who had been her closest friend had spent 20 years each believing the other one had simply stopped caring. She understood how it happened. The gala that had reopened it. The impulsive, terrible decision in Chicago. The affair that had not been planned and had destroyed everything anyway. Understanding it did not make it acceptable. She had known that the first night, when Damien had told her about Charlotte's grandmother. But knowing it as an abstract sequence of events and sitting at 4:30 in the morning with the physical evidence of it in her hands were 2 different things. The letters were real objects, worn at the edges, folded and refolded. Someone had kept them, had put them in this box. She looked at the return address on the envelopes, the address Damien had written them from, the house his family had moved to when he was 18. And then she looked at the box and at the photo albums it had been stored with, and she picked up one of the albums and opened it. Her mother's handwriting on the first page. Summer, Charlotte's visit. She turned to the photographs inside. Charlotte at Evelyn's parents' house. Charlotte and Ruth in the garden. Charlotte and Earl on the porch. Charlotte at what was clearly a family dinner, laughing at something, comfortable in the way you only were in a place where you'd been welcomed enough times that the welcome had become ordinary. Charlotte had been to Asheville, multiple times. Charlotte had been in this house, at this table, in a friendship with Evelyn's parents that Evelyn had never known the depth of. The question that rose in her then was ugly, and she knew it was ugly, and she let it rise anyway because suppressing it would have been dishonest. Had Charlotte been here because she was Evelyn's friend, or had she been tracking the proximity to Damien's name, to Damien's life, to the marriage that had placed her beloved person inside someone else's orbit? She didn't know. She couldn't know from a photograph. But she sat with it, all the way down to the bottom of it. The way it felt to realize that the most intimate parts of her life might have been witnessed by someone whose original motive had not been love of her. And then she did something that surprised her. She put the letters back in the bundle. She put the photograph back where she'd found it. She closed the box. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, with the dark outside and the house quiet around her, and she thought about the difference between understanding something and forgiving it, about whether understanding something even slightly obligated you to forgiveness, or whether you could hold both, the comprehension and the grief, without one canceling the other out. She didn't reach a conclusion. That was the honest answer. She was 43 years old, and she had found out in the span of a month that her marriage, her friendship, and a significant portion of her emotional history had been built on foundations she hadn't been given the full blueprints for, and she did not have a clean resolution to that. She had a cup of cold coffee and the early morning silence and the knowledge that she was still here, still upright, still the person her daughter was going to need to see functional in a few hours when the house woke up. That was enough for 4:30 in the morning. She called Barbara at 9. I found something, she said. Old letters. I need to know if they change anything legally. Tell me, she told her. Barbara listened without interrupting, which was the thing that made her a good attorney. They don't change anything legally, Barbara said when Evelyn was done. The terms are already signed. The process is in motion. I know. I needed to tell someone. I understand. A pause. What are you going to do with them? Evelyn looked out the kitchen window at the dormant garden, her father's bare vegetable beds in the gray November light. I don't know yet. You don't have to know yet. I know. She exhaled. One more thing. I need to ask you something that has nothing to do with the divorce. Okay? Charlotte Whitmore. She's a licensed architect. She has a business registration in New York. I want to know if she has any legal connection to any of Damien's business entities. Any of them. Going back 10 years. A short pause. That's an unusual request. I know. Can I ask why? Evelyn thought about the photograph. Charlotte at her parents' kitchen table. Charlotte who had known where Evelyn came from before Evelyn had ever thought to wonder what Charlotte knew. I want to know how much of it was planned. Barbara was quiet for a moment. I'll have someone look at it. It'll take a few days. That's fine, she paused. Thank you, Barbara. Evelyn. Barbara's voice was careful in the way it sometimes got when she was saying something that mattered. Whatever they find, it's not going to change the shape of what you lived. You know that, right? I know, Evelyn said. I just need the information. She hung up and went to find her mother. Ruth was in the garden in her coat, doing something to the beds that looked like a combination of clearing debris and just touching the earth, which was a thing Evelyn had watched her do her whole life without fully understanding the need for it until now. She went out and stood beside her without saying anything. Ruth glanced at her and then went back to what she was doing. You found the box, Ruth said. Evelyn turned to look at her. You knew it was there. I knew I'd put it there. Ruth crouched down and pulled something dead and fibrous out of the corner of a bed. Charlotte gave it to me, 8 or 9 years ago. She said she'd held on to it long enough and she needed it to be somewhere safe, but not with her. Why did she give it to you? Her mother sat back on her heels and looked up at her. Because she trusted me. And because She paused. Because I think she knew I'd make sure you found it eventually, if it needed to be found. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. You knew about Charlotte and Damien, before. I knew Charlotte had feelings she'd never resolved. Ruth stood up slowly, with the effort of a woman who worked through her body's resistance. I didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know what happened in your marriage until you called me. But you knew she'd been in love with him. Ruth looked at her steadily. Charlotte is a complicated person. She has also been a genuine friend to you. I don't think those two things cancel each other out. I'm not sure I'm able to be as philosophical about it as you are. I'm not being philosophical. Her mother brushed dirt from her gloves. I'm being old. It's different. A pause. What she did was wrong. What she allowed to happen was wrong. And she also loves you. All of that is true at the same time. Life is very rarely kind enough to give you clean categories. Evelyn looked at the bare garden. I asked my attorney to check if Charlotte had any legal ties to Damien's businesses. Ruth didn't react visibly. And? I don't have the results yet. She paused. I need to know if the friendship was ever, if it was ever also something else. Evelyn. Her mother's voice was gentle but direct. I think Charlotte's greatest failure was also her most human one. She loved someone she couldn't have, she built a life adjacent to that love, and then one night it collapsed on top of everyone. That's not a conspiracy. That's just... She stopped. That's just a very large personal failure. That's not enough for me right now. I know it isn't. Ruth touched her arm briefly. Come help me with this bed. It'll be good to use your hands. Evelyn crouched down beside her mother and pulled dead growth from cold soil, and they worked in silence for a while, and the sky above the mountains was low and gray and completely still. Barbara's assistant called 4 days later. Ms. Hines asked me to tell you, the search didn't turn up any formal legal connection between Ms. Whitmore's firm and any of Mr. Calloway's registered entities. No contracts, no payments, no documented relationship. A pause. Ms. Hines said to tell you that means the answer to your question is probably no. Evelyn was in the kitchen when the call came in. She sat down at the table, her table now, the one she'd eaten at as a child, the one she was starting to understand was going to be hers for a while. The answer to her question was probably no. The friendship had been a friendship. The feelings had been real. The betrayal had been a human disaster, not a calculated infiltration. She didn't know if that was better or worse. It was just what it was. She sat with it for a long time until Lily came down from her room and asked what was for dinner with the particular bluntness of a teenager who had decided that the way through hard times was practical questions. And Evelyn got up and looked in the refrigerator and said, I can make pasta. And Lily said, okay. And that was that. Charlotte called again on a Thursday evening, 3.5 weeks after Evelyn had told her to wait. Evelyn was sitting on the porch with a blanket and a glass of water and the specific exhausted piece of a day that had asked a lot of her and was now finally over. She looked at Charlotte's name on the screen. She answered. I found the box, Evelyn said before Charlotte could speak. A silence, long enough that Evelyn could hear Charlotte breathing. My mother told me you gave it to her, Evelyn said, 8 or 9 years ago. Yes, Charlotte's voice was barely audible. I read the letters. Another silence. So you know, Charlotte said, I know what happened with the grandmother. Damien told me some of it. The letters filled in the rest. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter. The November air off the mountains was clean and cold. What I don't understand is why you kept them, or why you gave them to my mother instead of me. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. I kept them because they were the only proof that what we had was real, that I hadn't imagined it or made it larger than it was. A breath. And I gave them to your mother because I couldn't figure out how to give them to you without destroying everything, and I couldn't throw them away, and I needed them to exist somewhere outside of me. Charlotte, Evelyn's voice was level. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Okay? When you first befriended me, was any part of that, was it ever about gathering information, about me, about the marriage, about anything that could... No. The word came out fast and hard and without hesitation. No. I wanted to know who you were. I was jealous of you before I knew you, and then I met you and you were... She stopped. You were the most genuine person I'd encountered in years. And I chose to be your friend because of who you were, not because of who you were married to. Evelyn sat with that. I never acted on it, Charlotte said. For 20 years. I need you to know that. Whatever you think of me. I know you didn't. Evelyn's voice was tired. Not angry, just tired. I know the timeline. I know what the gala was and what Chicago was. I understand how it happened. I'm not... She stopped. I'm not going to tell you that the understanding makes it hurt less. It doesn't. I know. But I understand it, she exhaled. That's what I have right now. I understand it. Charlotte made a sound that might have been the beginning of something, relief or grief or both, and then stopped herself. What do you need from me? Evelyn looked out at the dark mountain outline against the darker sky. I need you to give me more time. I need to know that you're not going to show up or call every week. I need... She paused. I need to be here for a while, just here, without managing anyone else's guilt. Okay? Charlotte's voice was quiet and completely steady now, which meant she was working very hard. Okay, I'll wait. I'll reach out when I'm ready, Evelyn said. I don't know when that is. I'll be here, Charlotte said. Evelyn hung up. She sat on the porch for another while, in the dark and the cold, with the mountains doing what mountains did, existing without commentary, solid and indifferent, and somehow, for exactly that reason, a comfort. It was 3 days after that call that Damien contacted her directly for the first time since she'd left New York. Not through attorneys, not through Torres or Sal or anyone on his operational side. A text message from his personal number, which still existed in her phone under the name she'd given him 12 years ago when she'd first put him in there, D. The message said, I know I have no right to ask, but I need to tell you something in person, not about the divorce, not about the kids, something about what I've been carrying for a long time that I should have told you years ago. You can say no, I'll accept it. She read it twice. She set her phone face down on the table. She picked it up again and read it a third time. She thought about the letters in the box, about the photograph of a boy who hadn't yet become the thing he would become, about 20 years of a marriage that had been, in its way, genuinely loving, imperfect and costly and sometimes claustrophobic and genuinely loving, and about the question of whether there was anything left to know that she hadn't already uncovered. She thought about what her mother had said. That's just a very large personal failure. She typed, 1 hour. Here. Next Saturday morning, come alone. She set her phone down. She went and put the kettle on because her hands needed something to do, and because the thing she felt right now was not what she'd expected to feel, which was the complicated ache of someone who was not done with something she very much wished she were done with. The kettle boiled, she poured the water. She stood at the counter and held the warm mug with both hands and tried to figure out what exactly she was preparing herself for. She couldn't. Some things don't let you prepare. She went to bed, and she lay in the dark of her childhood bedroom, and she listened to the mountains say nothing at all, and she waited for Saturday. Saturday came in cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning that had no ambiguity in it, just hard light off bare trees and air that found every gap in your clothing. Evelyn was up at 5. She didn't try to sleep past 4:30, which was when she woke and lay there for an hour, running through things she'd already resolved and knew better than to keep running through. At 5 she got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark until the sky started to change. Her parents knew Damien was coming. She'd told her father the night before, briefly, in the way she'd learned to deliver information to Earl Carter, directly, without softener, with enough detail that he wouldn't worry about what she was leaving out. He'd looked at her for a moment over his book. You want me here? He asked. No, she said. But don't go far. He'd nodded once and gone back to his book. That was Earl. She'd always loved that about him. Her mother had said nothing, which meant she had feelings about it that she'd chosen to keep, which was also Ruth, and which Evelyn was grateful for. Lily was at a school friend's house for the morning. Evelyn had arranged it 3 days earlier with the casual deliberateness of a woman who had spent 20 years managing a household around Damien Calloway's operational schedule. She was not going to have this conversation within range of her daughter's perception. Lily was perceptive enough without being handed the raw material. At 8:45, Evelyn put on her coat and went out to the porch. She heard the car before she saw it. A single vehicle, no escort, which meant he'd actually come alone or had told whoever was with him to stay at the bottom of the road. The car was not the black SUV she'd spent 20 years climbing in and out of. It was a dark gray sedan she didn't recognize, which meant he'd driven something deliberately unremarkable. She noted that. He parked at the edge of the drive and got out. She hadn't seen him since he'd left the apartment that night in October with his jacket over his arm. That was 6 weeks ago. He looked like 6 weeks ago had been 6 months of something hard. He was thinner, or maybe it was the coat, a simple dark wool thing that wasn't what he usually wore. His face was the same, composed, controlled, but the control was doing more work than it used to. She could see the effort of it. He came to the foot of the porch steps and stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." She didn't touch him when he came up the steps. She held the door and he walked through it, and she came in behind him, and the house smelled like coffee and her mother's particular brand of cleanliness. And Damien stood in the entryway of Earl and Ruth Carter's home with his hands at his sides and looked around the way a man looks around a room when he's trying to orient himself in a situation where none of his usual tools apply. "Sit down," she said. He sat at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee without asking and set it in front of him and sat across from him with her own mug and her hands flat on the table. "You said you had something to tell me," she said. "Tell me." He wrapped his hands around the mug. He looked at her. Whatever he'd been preparing to say, he seemed to be making a decision about the order of it. "When I built the business," he said, "I made a decision very early that I would keep you completely separated from the operational side of things. Not just legally, actually separated. You didn't know names, you didn't know locations, you didn't know the structure of any of it." He paused. "I told myself that was protection." "It was protection," she said. "For you." "Yes." He didn't flinch at that. "For me. And I told myself it was for you too because there's some truth to that. The less you know, the safer you are. But the main reason was that I needed to keep those two things separate in my own head. The work and the life. And you were the life." She said nothing. "What I didn't account for," he said, "is what that does to a person. When you're only allowed to exist inside one half of someone else's reality." He looked down at his coffee. "I controlled the information. I controlled the environment. I controlled—" He stopped. "I was not trying to control you, but I did. Because that's the only way I know how to operate, and I let it bleed over, and you spent 20 years in a version of our life that I curated without—" He exhaled. "Without ever asking if that's what you wanted." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "You drove 3 hours from New York to tell me you had control issues." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "No." He set his mug down. "I drove 3 hours because there's something in my business that's come up that involves you indirectly, and you need to know about it before it reaches you from a direction that's worse than this one." The warmth went out of the room, or out of Evelyn's body. She wasn't sure which. "Tell me," she said. "The Medina family," he said. "I've had a long-standing agreement with them going back about 8 years. When news of the separation started moving, and in my world that kind of news moves fast, they started making inquiries." He was choosing his words with precision now, the way he did when he was navigating something with multiple edges. "Specifically about you." Her hand stayed flat on the table. "What kind of inquiries?" "Whether you had exposure to information that could be used as leverage." He held her eyes. "They assumed because you'd been my wife for 20 years that you knew things, operational things, names, structures, locations." "I didn't." "I know you didn't. I made sure of it." A pause. "But they don't know that yet. And until they're certain you're a variable they're going to want to assess." The word assess sat in the air between them with all the weight he'd put into it. "Are you telling me I'm in danger?" she said. "I'm telling you someone in my world is going to try to make contact with you," he said. "Not violently. They don't work that way with civilians. It's too expensive and too visible. But someone is going to approach you. Probably someone you'd never look at twice. And they're going to ask you questions in a way that doesn't sound like questions." She stared at him. Something in her chest had gone very tight and very still. "You knew this might happen." "I suspected it was possible." "When?" He held her gaze. "When you left." The tight thing in her chest cracked open into something hot. "Damien." "I've been managing it from my end. I told them directly that you had no operational knowledge, that the separation was clean, that there was no value in approaching you. They're not certain I'm telling the truth." "Because why would you be?" "Because I'm me," he said. "And in my world, you don't take anyone's word for what they're protecting." She stood up. She wasn't thinking about it. She was just suddenly standing, because sitting still was no longer possible. She went to the window that looked out over the back garden, her father's bare beds, the tree line beyond. "You put me here," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely controlled and absolutely furious. "You put me and Lily here, and you knew that someone from your world might follow us here, and you didn't say anything for 6 weeks. I was handling it." She turned around. "That is not—" She stopped, started again. "That is not a sentence that means anything to me right now. You were handling it. You've been handling things for 20 years without telling me what you were handling, and look where we are." He didn't look away. "I know." "Does my father's address exist anywhere in your world?" "No, I made sure of it." "How?" "Because I've never written it down, registered it, or spoken it anywhere that could be recorded. Your parents' property is in your father's name, purchased before you and I met. There's no legal connection to anything with my name on it." He paused. "I've been careful about this specifically for years. In case." She looked at him. "You were protecting an exit route for me." "I was protecting the possibility of one." He said it without any softness in it, not asking for credit, just stating it. "I didn't know if you'd ever need it. I hoped you wouldn't." She sat back down. Not because she wasn't still furious, she was, but because there was more and she needed to hear it while she could still process it. "Who from the Medina side is likely to approach me?" she said. "A woman named Reyes. She's there—" He paused, finding language that lived outside his operational vocabulary. "She handles situations involving family members of principals. She's not aggressive. She's good at appearing ordinary." "Give me a description." He did. Precise and specific. Height, coloring, approximate age, a particular mannerism with her left hand when she was listening. Evelyn registered all of it. She had spent 20 years being married to a man who operated in a world that required this kind of attention, and she had absorbed more than she'd been given credit for. "What does she want to know?" "No," Evelyn said. "Whether you have information about the Callahan arrangement, 8 years ago. It involved real estate in 3 states and a financial structure that, if it became visible to certain federal investigators, would create problems for a number of people." He held her eyes steadily. "You don't have that information, but they need to believe you don't, not just be told." "How does someone convince them of that?" "By being exactly what you are." He said it directly. "A woman who is protected from knowing, who has no reason to lie about it because there's nothing to protect." She looked at him. "You're asking me to have a conversation with a person from a criminal organization and demonstrate my innocence convincingly. I'm telling you the conversation may happen whether or not you want it to. I wanted you to know it was possible so you're not blindsided." He paused. "If you want, I can try to intercept it entirely. Keep it away from you. I'm trying to do that, but I can't guarantee—" "You can't guarantee anything," she said. "That's the actual answer." He was quiet. She got up and went to the counter and stood with her back to him for a moment, her hands on the edge of the counter, looking at the wall. She was thinking. Not reacting, thinking, which was harder and more necessary. What she was confronting was something she'd understood intellectually for 20 years, but had never been forced to feel this directly. That the life she had agreed to at 24 had a cost that didn't stop accumulating just because she had walked away from it. You did not simply exit Damien Calloway's world by packing a suitcase and driving south. The world he operated in didn't recognize exits the way ordinary life did. She had known this the way you know something you've never had to act on. Now she was being asked to act on it. She turned back around. "Tell me exactly what to do if Reyes approaches me," she said. Something in his face shifted. Not relief exactly, but the release of a tension he'd been holding in a place where it didn't show. "Don't engage in a location you didn't choose. If she approaches you somewhere public and low risk, you can hear her out. Don't volunteer anything. Answer direct questions directly. If she asks if you have documents or recordings or any physical evidence of anything, the answer is no, and it's true, so say it without hesitation. And if she comes to this house, she won't. She operates in public spaces, cafes, parking lots, that kind of thing." He paused. "If she approaches you, contact me immediately after. Not before. Don't try to warn me in a way that could be observed. After. And you'll do what? Confirm to the Medina family through our existing channel that you've cooperated with their assessment and that your answer matches what I've told them." He looked at her steadily. "Which is the truth. So it will match." She sat back down across from him. They looked at each other across the kitchen table of her parents' house, and the morning light came through the window at a low angle and made everything look slightly older than it was. "I want something from you," she said. "Okay." I want your word, not a guarantee, I'm not asking for one, but your word that you will not make decisions that affect my safety or Lily's safety without telling me first. From here on, I don't care how well you think you're managing it. I don't care if you think it's handled. You tell me. He held her eyes for a long moment. You have my word. She nodded once. Then we're done with this part of the conversation. He absorbed that. Okay. A pause. Evelyn? The other thing. She said it before he could go somewhere she wasn't ready to go. You said two things. Something about what you've been carrying. I heard the Medina situation. What's the other thing? He was quiet for a moment in the way she'd come to understand meant he was moving through something that had no clean path. I spoke to Charlotte, he said. Evelyn's jaw tightened. When? 3 days ago. She called me. He was watching her carefully. She told me she'd spoken to you. And she told me something that she said you needed to know, but that she wasn't sure you were ready to hear from her. Evelyn's hands were very still on the table. Go ahead. When Charlotte befriended you in college, he said, she did it knowing who you were with. You know that. He paused. What she told me is that about 8 years into your friendship, she made a decision. She told me she had come to a point where she had two choices. She could remove herself from your life entirely, or she could accept that what she felt for me was something she was going to have to carry quietly and permanently and never act on. He held her eyes. She said she chose to stay because you had become the most important person in her life, more important than what she felt for me. Evelyn breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. The kitchen was completely still. She carried it for another 12 years, Damien said, and then the gala happened, and it came apart. But for 12 years, she chose you over it. Evelyn stared at the table. She told you this. She told me she wanted you to know that you weren't a cover story. You were the reason she stayed. He paused. I'm telling you because she asked me to, and because... He stopped. Because you deserve to have the complete picture. She sat with it. All 12 of those years laid out against the 4 years before that, when she now understood Charlotte had been running a more complicated internal calculus than Evelyn had known. 16 years of a friendship that, by any measure of the thing itself, had been real, had been the best and most sustaining friendship of her adult life. And then one night, one catastrophic night after a gala and a trip, and 20 years of an old wound that had never fully closed. I'm not going to be able to resolve this today, she said. Her voice was quiet and completely honest. I need you to understand that. What you've just told me, I need time with it. I know, he said. I don't... She stopped. Started again. I don't know what Charlotte and I are going to be. I don't know if there's a version of this where that friendship is recoverable. I'm not closing the door on it, but I can't open it right now. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him. What are you asking, Damien? Because you've told me two things, and I want to know what you actually came for. He looked back at her with the particular directness that had always been one of the things she found most genuine about him, the thing that coexisted somehow with all the ways he'd been less than honest. I came to make sure you were safe, he said. Medina was the first reason. The second reason, he paused. I needed to see you once, in person, to say what I should have said in that letter, but couldn't figure out how to put on paper. He looked at his hands around the mug, then back at her. I failed you before Chicago. I failed you before Charlotte. I built something that required you to be invisible inside it, and I told myself that was love, and it wasn't. It was convenience. It was me needing something in my life that was clean and separate and all mine, and you were the person I put in that space, and I didn't... His voice, which was always controlled, went slightly rough at the edges. I didn't see what that was doing to you until you were gone. She looked at him. At the man she had loved, who had failed her, who was sitting in her parents' kitchen trying to say something true with all the limited tools he had for saying true things. I heard you, she said. I heard that. He nodded. His jaw was tight. It doesn't change what happened, she said. I know. But I heard it, she paused. You should go now. Not because I'm angry. I am angry, but that's not why. You should go because this is as much as either of us can hold in one sitting, and because my father is somewhere on this property pretending to do something useful, and he's actually watching the driveway. Something moved in Damien's face that was briefly something like the smile she'd first seen at a gallery opening 20 years ago. Earl always did know where to be. He learned it from 20 years of having you as a son-in-law, she said. Go. He stood. He pushed the chair in. He'd always push the chair in, a small thing she'd never thought about until now, the way you never thought about small things until they were about to stop. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. At the kitchen door, he stopped. "The gas station in Virginia," he said. "The man who works there. Grant Walker." He said it without heat, without anything she could identify as accusatory. Just the information, stated plainly. She looked at him evenly. "I stopped for coffee." "I know." He held her gaze. "He seems like a good man." She didn't answer that because any answer she gave would be more than she was willing to hand him, and he seemed to understand that because he nodded slightly and went through the kitchen door. She listened to his footsteps in the hall, the front door, his steps on the porch, the car starting, the sound of it moving down the drive. She sat at the table for a long time after that. She thought about the Medina woman named Reyes and about how her life had followed her south like something she'd forgotten she was carrying. She thought about Charlotte, 12 years, the decision made and kept until it wasn't. She thought about Damien knowing Grant Walker's name, knowing it the way he knew everything, because his world kept records of things whether you wanted it to or not, and choosing to mention it not as a threat but as something else, something closer to a concession. She thought about the phrase he'd used. "He seems like a good man," which was, from Damien Calloway, as close as she was ever going to get to. "I want you to have that." Reyes found her on a Tuesday. It was 11 days after Damien's visit. Evelyn had spent those 11 days doing the ordinary things required by an ordinary life reassembling itself. Lily's school schedule, her father's doctor's appointment, a grocery run that took 40 minutes longer than it should have because she ran into 3 separate people who remembered her from childhood and wanted to know how she was doing, which required 3 separate performances of a version of fine that was mostly true. She'd half forgotten about Reyes. Or not forgotten. More that she'd put it in a room in the back of her mind and closed the door, the way she'd learned to do with things that required vigilance but not constant attention. She'd given it its room and gone back to living. She was at the coffee shop on Lexington Avenue that her mother liked, 2 blocks from the library, at a small table by the window with a paperback open in front of her that she'd been reading the same paragraph of for about 20 minutes. The place was warm and slightly too loud with the mid-morning crowd, and she was nursing a latte she'd let go cold. The woman who sat down across from her without being invited did not look like what Evelyn had expected, which meant Damien's description had been exactly right, because she had expected to be caught off guard. She was mid-40s, compact, with dark hair pulled back in an unremarkable bun, and a jacket that suggested she might work in any one of several ordinary professions. Her left hand rested on the table and her index finger moved slightly against the wood, just barely, a small rhythmic motion, the mannerism Damien had described. "Mind if I sit?" she said. She was already sitting. "Apparently not," Evelyn said. The woman's expression was pleasant and completely professional. "I'm going to be direct with you because I think you prefer that." "I do," Evelyn said. "My name isn't important. I'm here because certain people have questions about what you know and don't know, and I'm the person they send to ask those questions in a civilized way." She set her hands flat on the table. "Mrs. Calloway." "Ms. Carter," Evelyn said. The woman absorbed that without expression. "Ms. Carter, do you have any knowledge of financial arrangements made by your husband's organization in the period from 2014 to 2017 involving real estate acquisitions in New York, New Jersey, and Georgia?" Evelyn looked at her steadily. Her heartbeat was elevated, she could feel it in her throat, but her face was doing none of that. 20 years of Calloway family dinners had given her a poker face that was, at this point, essentially structural. "No," she said. "Any documents, physical or digital, records, photographs, correspondence." "No." "Were you present at any meetings or conversations involving those arrangements?" "No." She paused. "I was not involved in my husband's business in any capacity. That was the arrangement. I was aware it existed and I had no access to any part of it." The woman studied her. Not aggressively, more the way you study something when you're trying to determine its load-bearing capacity. "That must have been an unusual way to live," she said. "It was the only way I lived it," Evelyn said. "I don't have a comparison." Another beat. The woman's finger had stopped its motion against the table. "One more question," she said. "In the event that federal investigators were to contact you regarding your husband's activities, which, to be clear, I'm not suggesting is imminent, what would your response be?" Evelyn held her gaze. "I'd tell them exactly what I know, which is nothing operationally useful, and refer them to my attorney." She paused. "Barbara Hines." You probably already know who she is. Something passed through the woman's face, brief, controlled, but there. Recognition, and something adjacent to respect. Thank you for your time, the woman said. She stood up. She left without buying anything, which meant she'd never intended to stay long, which meant the whole thing had been a calibration exercise rather than an actual interrogation. They'd wanted to see how Evelyn reacted, whether she got scared, whether she offered too much, whether she looked like a woman with something to hide or a woman with nothing. Evelyn sat at the table after she left and breathed, slowly, through the residual adrenaline. She drank the last of her cold coffee. She opened her phone and typed a message to Damien's number. She came. I'm fine. It went the way you said. His response came back in 4 minutes. Thank you. You won't hear from them again. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked out the window at the ordinary Tuesday street. Her hands were shaking very slightly. She put them flat on the table until they stopped. She closed the paperback she hadn't been reading, tucked it in her bag, and stood up. She left a tip that was more than the coffee warranted because the woman behind the counter had given her a warm-up she hadn't asked for and a smile she hadn't expected, and some mornings that mattered more than other mornings. She walked out into the cold November air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, getting her bearings. The street was ordinary. The sky was low and white. Somewhere down the block, a dog was arguing with a garbage can. She put her coat collar up and walked toward her car. Shum. That evening, she called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been expecting her. She'd been calling daily, as promised, but this call was different, and he must have heard it in the first second. What happened? He said. Nothing I can't handle, she said, but I need to tell you something about your father's world that you're old enough to hear. She told him about the Medina situation. Not all of it, not the operational specifics, because those weren't hers to give and he didn't need them, but enough. Enough that he understood what his mother had just navigated in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. He was quiet for a long time. Are you safe? He said. Yes. Is Lily safe? Yes. Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice had something in it she'd heard before. A particular controlled quality that she recognized, that had come not from her but from Damien, that had been passed down with the bone structure and the patience, and that she had always found equal parts reassuring and heartbreaking. I'm coming home, he said. Marcus, I'm not asking. I'm coming home. He paused. I've got a week before finals. I'm coming home for that week. She could have argued. She'd argued him out of it before. She looked at the window above the kitchen sink, at the dark outside, and her own face reflected back at her, and she said, Okay. Good. A beat. Mom. Yeah. You handled that. I did. Good, he said again, and she could hear him meaning it all the way through the phone line and the 300 miles between them. She hung up and stood in the kitchen and let herself feel what she'd been not feeling since she left the coffee shop. It came up fast. The fear that had been managed rather than processed. The rage beneath the fear. The exhaustion beneath the rage. She stood with it, let it move through her, and waited for it to pass to the other side. It did. It always did. She went to find her mother. Ruth was in the living room with a book, her reading glasses on, the specific lamp on that she used for evening reading. She looked up when Evelyn came in. Evelyn sat down on the couch next to her. She didn't say anything. After a moment, Ruth set her book down and took her glasses off. Tell me, Ruth said. So she did. Her mother listened the way she always had, without interrupting, without flinching, with the steady attention of a woman who had spent her whole life making room for the things her daughter needed to put down somewhere. When Evelyn finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand over Evelyn's. Earl? Evelyn said. He'll hear it in the morning, Ruth said. Tonight you've told enough people. Evelyn exhaled. Okay. Are you all right? She thought about it honestly. She stopped. I'm still here, she said. That's the best I can give you right now. Ruth squeezed her hand once and let go. That's enough, she said. She picked up her book. She put her glasses back on. They sat there in the lamplit living room for a long time, mother and daughter, in a house that had held them both through 100 different versions of hard. And outside the mountains were dark and close, and the night was cold and completely still, and somewhere in the morning Marcus would be packing a bag, and somewhere in New York a woman named Reyes was filing a report that said, nothing there, and somewhere beyond all of it, the life that Evelyn Carter was going to live next was waiting for her to arrive at it. She wasn't there yet. She was still in the room before it, sitting with what the last few months had cost her and what they had, despite everything, confirmed about what she was made of. But the morning was coming, and she was still standing. Marcus arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a rental car he'd driven from the Asheville airport, still in his campus jacket, his backpack thrown in the back seat with the particular carelessness of someone who'd packed in 15 minutes. Evelyn heard the car and came out to the porch without thinking about it, and when he got out and she saw his face, her son's face, which had her mouth and his father's eyes and 20 years of a family assembled in it, something in her chest broke open and put itself back together in the same moment. He was taller than she remembered, which was absurd because he'd been this height for 3 years, and she'd seen him at Thanksgiving. But he looked older today. He looked like a man, fully, in the way that happened not gradually, but in the noticing of it. He came up the porch steps and put his arms around her, and she let herself be held by her son, which was not something she'd allowed herself to need before this moment. And she held him back hard, her face against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a long time. "You're okay," he said finally. Not a question. "I'm okay," she said. He pulled back and looked at her the way Damien used to look at a situation he was assessing, methodically, checking for things that weren't visible on the surface. Then he nodded, once, apparently satisfied with what he found. "Where's Lily?" he said. "School. She'll be home at 4. "Good." He picked up his backpack. "I'm starving. Tell me there's food." There was food. Ruth had been cooking since Tuesday in the specific way she had of expressing feelings she didn't put into words, which meant there was a pot of soup, a pan of cornbread, a pie cooling on the counter, and 3 separate containers of things in the refrigerator that Evelyn had stopped trying to catalog. Marcus ate at the kitchen table with the focused efficiency of a young man who'd been running on dining hall food and anxiety, and Earl sat across from him and asked him about his thesis, in the careful way Earl asked about things he genuinely wanted to understand. And Evelyn stood at the counter and watched her family occupy her parents' kitchen and felt something settle in her that she hadn't known was unsettled. This was still real. All of it. Marcus's laugh when Earl said something dry and unexpected. Ruth moving around the kitchen in her particular orbit, the smell of soup and cornbread and cold air from the slightly open window. The last several months had taken so much, and this was still here. She turned back to the counter and cut the pie, and didn't say anything about the feeling because there was no sentence for it that wouldn't reduce it to something smaller than it was. She told Marcus the full version that evening, after dinner, after Lily had gone to do homework and Earl and Ruth had retreated to the living room with the understanding that this conversation needed the kitchen and the closed door. She told him about the night with the phone, about Charlotte's apartment, about the drive south, about Damien's visit and the Medina situation and Reyes in the coffee shop. She told him about the letters she'd found and what they'd explained about the history between his father and Charlotte, and she told him what Damien had said about Charlotte's 12 years of choosing Evelyn over what she felt. She told him all of it. She did not soften it. He listened the way he'd always listened, with his elbows on the table and his hands loosely clasped, and his eyes steady on her face, moving occasionally to the table when something needed to be absorbed before he could receive the next thing. He was 20 years old, and she was aware, in the telling, that some of this was going to change the shape of things he'd believed. She didn't see a way around that. When she finished, the kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the house, her parents' television murmured. "The Medina woman," he said. "She's done?" "Your father said so." "Do you believe him?" She thought about it honestly. "Yes." He nodded, picked at the edge of a napkin. "And Charlotte?" "I don't know yet." "Are you going to be able to—" He stopped, chose different words. "Is that something you think you can come back from?" She looked at her son. "I don't know, Marcus. I'm trying to be honest about that rather than deciding ahead of time." He considered that. That's fair." "Your father," she said it carefully. "I need to know how you are with what I've told you." He was quiet for a moment. "He did something unforgivable, and then he didn't make you fight for what was fair. Those are both true." Another pause. "I'm not going to stop being his son, but I also—" His jaw tightened slightly. "He knew about the Medina thing when you left, and he didn't tell you for 6 weeks. That's—" He stopped. "That's him," she said quietly. "That's how he operates." "Yeah." His voice was careful, controlled in the way that meant it was costing him. "I know it is." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, the way he had as a small boy, and for a moment he was both things simultaneously. The man he'd become and the child she'd brought into a complicated world and done her best to protect inside it. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Whatever this does to your relationship with him, I want you to know that what you've done through this has been—" Her voice caught slightly. She let it. "You've been exactly who I needed you to be." He squeezed her hand once. Didn't say anything. His eyes were bright but steady. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Okay." She squeezed back and let go, and they sat there in the kitchen a while longer, not talking, just occupying the same quiet space the way families did when they'd said the necessary things and needed time to let them settle. Lily found out the rest on Saturday. Not from Evelyn, from Marcus, which was how Evelyn had anticipated it happening, because Lily had always taken hard information better from her brother than from their parents, a dynamic Evelyn had long since stopped trying to alter. She heard them in Lily's room with the door mostly closed, Marcus's voice low and Lily's responses short, and then not short, a stretch of quiet, then Lily's voice at a different pitch than usual. She did not go upstairs. An hour later, Lily came down to the kitchen where Evelyn was at the table with coffee she'd stopped tasting. Lily stood in the doorway for a moment. Her eyes were dry, but there was a rawness around them that meant she'd been crying and was finished with it for now. "Did you know," Lily asked, "about Dad and Charlotte, the history? Did you know when it was happening?" "No," Evelyn said. "I found out the same way you did, after." Lily absorbed that. She came and sat across from her mother. She was wearing an oversized sweatshirt, and her hair was up, and she looked very young and also not young at all. "Are you going to ever talk to Charlotte again?" she said. "I think so, eventually." Evelyn held her daughter's gaze. "But not yet." Lily turned this over. "She was real, though, as a friend. I always liked her." "I know." "That makes it worse, kind of." Lily's voice was honest. "If she'd been fake about everything, it would be easier to just—" She made a small, decisive gesture. "Yes," Evelyn said. "It does make it worse." Lily looked at the table. "I'm still angry at Dad." "That's allowed." "I know it's allowed. I'm just—" She pressed her lips together. "I'm telling you where I am." "I hear you." Lily looked up. "Where are you? With him?" Evelyn considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Somewhere between the anger and the part that comes after. I haven't gotten all the way to the part that comes after. But I can see it from where I am." Her daughter looked at her for a long moment with those eyes that had always known too much. "Okay," Lily said. She stood up. She stopped at the doorway. "The man at the gas station, Grant." Her voice was careful, like she was setting something down gently. "He texted you again." Evelyn kept her expression neutral. "I know." "You should text him back." "Lily, I'm not saying anything else about it." She held up one hand. "I'm just noting that you've been not responding to his texts for 3 weeks, and maybe it's time to respond. That's all." She disappeared up the stairs before Evelyn could answer. Evelyn sat at the table with her cold coffee and stared at the doorway her daughter had just vacated. Then she picked up her phone. What? She had not let herself think about Grant Walker very much. This was deliberate. The timing of him was too convenient, and she didn't trust convenient things. And the fact that something had felt genuine in a 10-minute conversation at a gas station on a bad night could have been the simple relief of kindness after cruelty, rather than anything that meant something on its own. She'd stopped at the station twice more since settling in Asheville, once in early November, once the week after Damien's visit. Both times brief. Both times Grant had been behind the counter or visible through the window, and both times she'd paid for gas and not gone in. She'd told herself she was being sensible. What Lily had said was true. He texted twice. Short texts, both of them. The first asking if she'd made it to Asheville okay, which she'd read and not answered. The second, 2 weeks later, that said only, "The coffee here is better than what I gave you that night, just so you know," which had made her smile in a way she'd immediately felt guilty about, and then decided the guilt was not a productive response, and set the phone down and still not answered. She stared at his number now. She typed, "I don't doubt it. I've been meaning to say thank you for that night." It was a harder night than I made it look. She sent it before she could think about it more. She set the phone face down. It buzzed 40 seconds later. She turned it over. "You didn't have to make it look like anything. That's what the coffee was for." She sat with that for a moment. Then she typed, "Would you want to have dinner sometime? I'm in Asheville now. It's not far." The response took 3 minutes, which was long enough that she'd started to regret sending it. Then, I know where Asheville is. I've been going there for parts for the station. Saturday work? She exhaled. She typed, Saturday work. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in late February, a gray day that didn't distinguish itself from the gray days on either side of it. Barbara called at 11:17 in the morning. Evelyn noticed the time because it was the same time Barbara had called 6 months earlier to tell her Damien had signed the initial terms, and she allowed herself a moment of noticing the symmetry before letting it go. "It's done," Barbara said. Thank you, Evelyn said, "for everything." "You did the hard parts," Barbara said. "I did the paperwork." A pause, and then in a slightly different register. "You're going to be fine, Evelyn." "I know," Evelyn said. She'd stopped hedging it. She was in the kitchen when the call came. After she hung up, she stood at the window for a while, looking at her father's garden, which had begun to come back in small and tentative ways. A few shoots of something in the far bed, the particular color that preceded green before it committed. February in the mountains was still cold and spare, but it had a different quality now than the November cold she'd arrived in. Something in it was pointing forward. She put on her coat and went outside. She walked through the garden slowly, her hands in her pockets. The ground was still hard under her feet. She stopped at the far corner where her father had planted something years ago that she'd never known the name of and had never gotten around to asking about, and she stood there for a while. 20 years. A marriage, a friendship, a life assembled around a man who operated in a world that had its own gravity. 2 children who had become people she genuinely admired, which was the thing she hadn't fully allowed herself to appreciate until this period of stillness. The scars of it, and there were scars, she wasn't going to pretend otherwise, were real and permanent in hers. But so was this moment, this cold February garden, this being here, on her own terms, in a life that was still taking shape. She heard the back door and turned. Her father was coming across the garden in his coat, unhurried, the way Earl moved through everything. He stopped beside her and looked at whatever it was she'd been looking at in the corner of the bed. "Barbara called," she said. "I figured." He put his hands in his pockets. They stood there together. "How are you?" "Good," she said, and meant it, more than she'd meant it in a while. He nodded. He didn't say anything else, which was one of the best things about her father. He knew when words were less than the quiet. They stood in the garden together for a while, in the cold morning light, with the mountains at the edge of everything. She drove to Grant Station on a Saturday in early March because they'd been having dinner in Asheville, and she'd suggested once that she'd like to see the place she'd stopped that night. And he'd said, "Whenever you want, no pressure," and she'd thought about it for 2 weeks and decided she wanted to see it in the daylight. It looked different in daylight. Obviously, everything did. But the particular quality of it surprised her. It was smaller than she remembered, and more run down in the affectionate way of things that had been tended for a long time by someone who cared about them without the resources to make them perfect. The pumps were old. The sign had a letter with a slight lean to it. The cafe part, which she could now see was an actual small room attached to the station proper, had 3 tables and a counter and a chalkboard with the day's specials in handwriting that was clearly Grant's. He came out when her car pulled in. He was in work clothes, jeans, a flannel over a thermal, his sleeves pushed up the way they always seemed to be, as if warmth was something he ran at rather than dressed for. He had the stillness she'd noticed that first night, the quality of someone who'd made peace with his own company, and so wasn't desperate with anyone else's. She got out. He smiled, and it was the same kind of smile she'd catalogued that first night, genuine, without performance. "You came on a good day," he said. "Light's good this time of afternoon." She looked around the property. The highway behind them, the hills beyond, the particular quality of the light he'd mentioned, low and gold and specific in the way afternoon light was specific in this part of the state. "You were right," she said. "It's different in daylight." "Most things are." He tilted his head toward the cafe door. "Coffee's fresh." She followed him inside. She sat at the counter, and he poured 2 cups and sat on the other side of it, and they talked the way they'd been talking for the last several weeks over dinner, easily, without the particular effort of 2 people trying to establish that they were interesting. They were past that. She didn't know exactly when they'd gotten past it, but they had. She told him about the divorce being finalized. She hadn't planned to tell him today specifically, but it came up naturally, and she let it come. He listened without rushing to fill the silence after. Then he said, "How do you feel about it?" "Like I finished something," she said. Not like I won anything. Just finished it. He nodded. That makes sense. Do you... She stopped. I've never asked you directly. About your wife. She paused. I don't have to. No, it's okay. He turned his mug in his hands. Her name was Susan. Breast cancer, 5 years ago. We'd been married 18 years. He was quiet for a moment. It gets to a point where it's not a wound anymore. It's more like something that changed the shape of everything after. You learn to live around the new shape. She looked at him. That's an honest way to put it. Seems stupid to pretend it was something else. He met her eyes. I'm not in a hurry, he said. Not pressuring, just naming it. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever pace it needs, I'm not going anywhere. She held his gaze. I appreciate you saying that. I mean it. I know you do, she said. That's why I appreciate it. He smiled again, and she smiled back, and they sat there in the small cafe attached to a gas station on a rural Virginia highway in the afternoon light, and it was not dramatic or cinematic or the kind of thing that announced itself as significant. It was just two people sitting with coffee and the comfortable fact of each other, and that the complete ordinariness of it, after everything, was the most significant thing she could imagine. Charlotte came to Asheville in April. Evelyn had asked her to come. She'd called her in mid-March and said directly that she was ready to have the conversation they hadn't been able to have over the phone, and Charlotte had said she'd come whenever Evelyn said, and Evelyn had said the second Saturday in April, and Charlotte had said okay, and they'd both been quiet on the phone for a moment in the way of people who had been best friends for 23 years and were not sure, yet, what they still were. She came in her own car driving down from New York. She pulled up in front of Evelyn's parents' house at noon. Lily was with a school friend. Marcus was back at college. Her parents had been told not to come home before 4. And she got out looking the way she had at Charlotte's best. Pulled together but not polished. The particular version of herself she'd always been with Evelyn, where the armor was down. They looked at each other across the driveway for a moment. Then Evelyn said, "Come inside," and Charlotte came inside. They sat in the living room. Not the kitchen, which felt too ordinary for what this was, and not outside, where the cold air would have required a different kind of attention. The living room with its comfortable furniture and Ruth's accumulated decades of careful arrangement. Charlotte sat in the armchair. Evelyn sat on the couch. They had coffee and mugs that were slightly too hot to drink yet. I don't know how to start this, Charlotte said. Then I will, Evelyn said. I'm going to tell you what I know and what I've worked through, and then you can respond to it, and we're not going to rush it. Charlotte nodded. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and her knuckles were white. Evelyn told her about the box, about finding the letters, about what she'd understood in the gray early morning kitchen, about the shape of the things Charlotte had been carrying. She told her what Damien had said, about the 12 years, about Charlotte's decision, and she watched Charlotte's face when she said it, because she needed to see how Charlotte responded to the exposure of something she hadn't intended Evelyn to know this way. Charlotte looked at the floor. Her jaw was tight. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. I didn't ask him to tell you that, she said. I know. He told me you asked him to. Charlotte shook her head. I asked him to tell you that the friendship was real. I didn't ask him to tell you the 12 years part. She exhaled unevenly. That was his choice. Evelyn looked at her. Does it matter that he chose to tell me? A silence. I don't know, Charlotte said honestly. I read the letters, Evelyn said. Both directions. I know what the grandmother did. I know what that cost both of you at 18. She paused. I've spent several months trying to figure out how much of what I feel is grief for my marriage and how much is grief for what we were, and I can't fully separate them. They're the same loss. Charlotte's breath came out unsteadily. I know. I'm not going to tell you that understanding how it happened erases what it did, Evelyn said. It doesn't. You were my best friend, Charlotte, the person I called for everything. And what happened in Chicago, I know, Charlotte said. Her voice cracked on the second word. Broke something that's not going to be unbroken. Evelyn held her gaze. I need you to hear that without me having to soften it. Did I hear it? Charlotte's voice was barely above a whisper. I've heard it every day since. They sat with that for a moment. The house was quiet. The April light came through the window at a gentle angle and lay across the floor between them. I also need you to know, Evelyn said, that I know the friendship was real. I know you weren't using me. I had my attorney check. She watched Charlotte's face process that, the slight flinch of it. I needed to know. She found nothing. And my mother showed me the photographs from your visits here, and I know what those meant. And she paused. I know. Charlotte pressed her lips together hard. Her eyes were wet now, not crying yet, but close. I'm not going to be able to be what we were, Evelyn said. Not immediately. Maybe not for a long time. Maybe not fully, ever. I don't know yet, and I'm not going to make you a promise I'm not certain of. She paused. But I'm not going to cut you out entirely. Because I also know that losing you on top of everything else it's too much. And I think you know what you did to us both, and I think you're going to carry that regardless of what I decide. Charlotte nodded. A single tear ran down her face, and she didn't wipe it. What I want, Evelyn said, is time. More time than I've had. And I want to know where you are. Not daily, not the way we used to be, but to know you're there. And I want you to be honest with me when we talk. No managing, no performing. The same thing I should have been asking of everyone for 20 years. Okay, Charlotte said. Her voice was rough. I can do that. I know you can. Evelyn picked up her coffee mug. You always could. That was never the problem. Charlotte pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she lowered it. She picked up her own mug. She looked at Evelyn across the room, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who has been handed something they know they don't fully deserve and are trying to receive it with the gravity it requires. I'm moving to Seattle, she said. I took a position there. Architecture firm. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I finalized it last month. Evelyn looked at her. When? End of May. Is it because of all this? Partly. Charlotte's voice was steady now, deliberate. And partly because New York stopped making sense for me a while ago, and I've been too afraid to leave it. And partly because I think you and I both need… She paused. Distance that isn't about anger, just new geography, room to figure out what we are from a place that isn't loaded. Evelyn considered this. Seattle's far. It's far, Charlotte agreed. Call me when you're settled, Evelyn said. Charlotte's eyes went bright again. Yeah? Yeah. Evelyn held her gaze. We don't have to be what we were right away. We can be something else first and see where it goes. She paused. 23 years is worth that much. Charlotte nodded. She pressed her lips together again, composing herself, and Evelyn let her do it without filling the space. They sat together in the living room for another hour after that, talking in the way they had always talked, haltingly at first, and then more easily, about smaller things, about Charlotte's new job and Lily's paintings and Marcus's thesis, about the mountain spring that was coming in around the edges of everything. It was not the same as it had been. They both knew it wasn't the same, but it was something, and it was honest. And for the first time in months, Evelyn felt the faint possibility of it becoming something she could recognize as her life going forward, rather than just the wreckage of the one before. Charlotte left at 3:30. They hugged at the car, briefly, tightly, and without words, because they had used up the words and what was left was older than language. Evelyn stood on the porch and watched her drive away down the mountain road until the car was gone. Then she went inside and called her mother and told her she could come home. Damien called in late April. She was in the kitchen when her phone lit up with his name, D, still in her phone that way, and she'd thought about changing it but hadn't, some instinct telling her to leave the record of the thing as it was. She answered. I heard Charlotte's leaving, he said. Yes. Seattle. A pause. That's a long way. It is. A silence that was not uncomfortable, which was its own kind of information about where they'd arrived. I wanted to tell you… He stopped, started again. I've been thinking about something since I came to Asheville. About what I said. About what I should have said years ago instead of then. Damien, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know where we are. I just need you to know that what I said to you in that kitchen was not me trying to recover something. It was just, it needed to be said, and it was overdue. She leaned against the counter. I know that. Okay, he exhaled. How are the kids? Marcus is good. He's finishing his thesis. He's met someone, I think, though he hasn't told me yet. A slight warmth in his voice. He'll tell you eventually. He tells me everything eventually. He just takes his time, she paused. Lily is doing something extraordinary, actually. She's been painting constantly since we got here. I didn't know she could paint. Apparently she's been doing it for 2 years and keeping it to herself. That sounds exactly like Lily. It does, she agreed. A pause. She's good, Damien. I mean that. She's genuinely talented. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize you were right there and still missed it. He was quiet for a moment. Can I, if she wanted to show me something, would that be okay? That's between you and Lily, she said. Talk to her. She'll tell you where she is with you. Okay? A beat. And you? I'm good, she said. I mean that too. He was quiet in the way she'd learned to read over 20 years, processing something rather than building to something. I'm glad, he said. Just that. She believed him. Take care of yourself, she said. I mean that. You too, he said. She hung up and stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and the afternoon coming through the window at a low, warm angle. The conversation had cost her something and given her something in equal measure, the way the necessary ones did. She set the phone on the counter and went to find her daughter. Lily had taken over the spare bedroom as a studio. It had happened gradually, a canvas here, paint supplies there, and Evelyn had let it happen without comment because watching Lily be consumed by something creative was one of the better things she'd witnessed in recent months. The room smelled like paint and turpentine and a particular kind of focused energy. She knocked on the open door. Lily turned from where she was working at the small folding table she'd set up in the corner. Dad called, Evelyn said. Lily's expression moved through something complex and settled into something she was still deciding on. What did he want? Just to say hello. He mentioned he'd like to see your work sometime. I told him that was up to you. Lily looked at her painting, a landscape Evelyn couldn't quite read yet, mountains and light, and something in the foreground she was working out. Maybe, she said. There's no right answer, Evelyn said. Take your time. Lily turned back to the canvas. What are you doing today? Grant's coming for dinner, she paused. I wanted to give you plenty of warning. Lily's back was to her, but Evelyn could see the slight shift in her shoulders. Is this going to be a regular thing? I don't know yet, Evelyn said honestly. I'm figuring it out. Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said without turning around, He better not be boring. He isn't. Good. She dipped her brush. Tell him I want to see the gas station sometime. I've been thinking about a painting of it. Evelyn looked at her daughter's back, at the focused set of her shoulders, the particular deliberateness of her attention on the canvas, and felt the thing she'd been building toward for months without naming it. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was too simple for what this was. More like arrival. The sense of having gotten through something and found, on the other side of it, a life she recognized as hers. I'll tell him, she said. She left Lily to her painting and went to start dinner. Yeah. Grant arrived at 6 with something wrapped in foil that turned out to be a pie he'd made himself from a recipe his mother had left him, and Earl took one look at a man who showed up with homemade pie and made an immediate and permanent decision about him that Ruth communicated to Evelyn with a single quiet glance across the kitchen. Dinner was loud in the way that dinners with Earl became loud when he found someone worth talking to, animated and wide-ranging, veering from the mechanics of the gas station pumps to the history of the mountain road. Grant took between Virginia and North Carolina to Ruth's garden, which Grant had opinions about that surprised Evelyn and delighted Ruth. Lily came down and ate without ceremony and asked Grant 3 direct questions about the station, which he answered without condescension, and at the end she said, I want to paint it, and he said, come whenever you want, and that appeared to settle something for Lily. After dinner, after her parents had retreated and Lily had gone back upstairs, Evelyn and Grant sat on the back porch with the remaining pie and the last of the coffee and the Spring Mountain evening doing what Spring Mountain evenings did, coming in warm and then cooling, the light going slow and amber, and then finally gone. They sat in the comfortable quiet that had become one of the things she valued most about him. He didn't fill silence because he was afraid of what was in it. He sat in it with the same steadiness he brought to everything. Your family, he said eventually. What about them? They're good people. He said it simply. Your daughter's going to be formidable. Evelyn smiled. She already is. Your dad asked me 6 questions about the station that nobody who doesn't actually care about infrastructure asks. He glanced at her sideways. He was evaluating me. Of course he was. Did I pass? She considered this with mock seriousness. The pie helped significantly. He laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, and she'd been collecting those across the months of knowing him, The moments when the steadiness broke into something warmer. She'd noticed she did that. She decided that was probably a good sign. They watched the last of the light leave the sky above the mountain line. The stars came in slowly, the way they did out here without the city competing. "I'm glad I stopped that night," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "So am I." She looked at him. At the profile of him in the last light, the gray at his temples, the easy way he occupied space, and she thought about everything that had led to that gas station on a dark Virginia highway on a bad night in October. The 20 years and the message on a phone and Charlotte's apartment and the drive south and all of it, all the cost of it, the scars of it that were still there and were going to stay. And she thought, here, on the other side of all of it, was this: a porch and a mountain evening, and a man sitting beside her who didn't need anything from her that she wasn't freely giving. That was it. That was the whole complicated, improbable, earned equation of it. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the mountains, dark and permanent and indifferent in the best possible way, doing what they'd always done, existing without needing to be explained. She thought about Damien, alone in his penthouse above the city he'd built himself inside, with all his power and all his regret. She thought about Charlotte, packing boxes for Seattle, carrying something forward that would weigh less the further she traveled from where it had happened. She thought about her children, becoming themselves at the rate that children did when you finally got out of the way, enough to let them. She thought about the woman she had been at 23, in a gallery, looking at paintings because she actually wanted to look at them, before the world of someone else's making had come to seem like the only world available. She was still that woman. Underneath everything that had been laid on top of her, she had been that woman the whole time, waiting. She set her coffee down. She leaned back in the chair. The night was warm enough, barely, and the stars were doing what they did, and beside her Grant Walker was quietly finishing his pie and watching the same skies she was watching, and not asking her to be anything she wasn't. She breathed in, she breathed out. The mountain said nothing at all. She was, for the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, simply herself. And that was more than enough.